wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the program, which is produced with support from MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. Well, if you've heard our podcast before, you know that typically we feature interviews with physicians, but we also like to hear from non-physician experts in the healthcare world. Today, I'm excited to share my interview with a very successful executive from a large healthcare system in Ohio. Janet Smith Meeks completed her bachelor's and MBA degrees at the University of Mississippi in the late 1970s. And she immediately went to work in the banking and finance industry, where she expected to remain for the rest of her career. But within just a few short years, her priorities would change as a result of a profound life event, and she made a decision to reimagine her career plans. She has recently published a new book entitled Gracious Leadership, Lead Like You've Never Led Before, where she tells the story of her 4-decade career in the field of healthcare. She lived out the final chapter of that journey as the president of Mount Carmel St. Anne's Hospital in Westerville, Ohio, where she led the transformation of a struggling community hospital into an award-winning regional medical center ranking in the top 5% of all U.S. hospitals. In my interview with Janet, we talked about how and why she chose to leave the financial industry and how she went about reinventing herself as a successful healthcare executive. So now, let's hear my interview with Janet Smith Meeks. Well, Janet Meeks, I want to begin by saying thank you very much for being with us today and welcome to Prescription for Success.
Well, thank you so much, Randy. It's certainly my joy and honor to be here with you today, and I look forward to the conversation at hand.
Well, I'm looking forward to it as well. We're going to talk a lot about your book today, Gracious Leadership. But to get us started, what I would really like to do, if it's okay with you, is talk about your early years. I know that you grew up in the rather small town of Carthage, Mississippi, near the geographic center of the state, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct.
And you grew up at a time that was really pivotal in the South. And you and I experienced something that not every person in this country has experienced, and that is the desegregation of the public school systems, which was a significant event for the South. And I know it had a formative effect on me. And from reading your book, I think it had an effect on you as well. And I would just like for you to tell us a little bit about those years and what it was like.
Well, thank you so much, Randy, for the opportunity to share. I am so fortunate, indeed blessed, to have been born the daughter to a self-proclaimed country lawyer whose name was Ed Smith. And he returned to Central Mississippi after completing his law degree and wanted to serve the community there. And he would frequently be paid, sometimes with money, sometimes with pies or cakes or whatever fresh vegetables the clients would want to offer to him. He just had a servant's heart. He was very deeply convicted that all people were beautifully and wonderfully made in the eyes of God, and as such, he believed that every person was to be fully respected. In fact, my father abhorred pretense. He felt that leaders ought to be down to earth and relatable, and he would bristle if he ever saw another person putting on airs or putting down another individual because of their gender, their ethnicity, or their lot in life. So my father represented the Leake County School Board in 1964 when the federal mandate was issued that the schools of Mississippi were to be integrated, starting with 4 school districts. And my school district was one of those 4. And my father is the person who told the school board members that we had to abide by the federal mandate. We would be integrating our schools. And as you can imagine, in 1964, at the height of unrest in the civil rights movement in the South, this was not a popular stance to take. But he persevered. He knew it was the right thing to do, and he really put a lot on the line in order to show ultimate respect for all people. In fact, Randy, he had to meet with the FBI. He had to carry a gun. He became an enemy target of the KKK, and they burned a cross in front of his law office. They burned down the barn on our farm, and they actually made death threats on his life, my mother's life, my brother's life, and my life. But regardless of the horrific actions of the KKK, my father never wavered in his conviction that all people were to be created equally.
But that must have been terribly frightening for you at the time.
It was, Randy. In fact, I did not write this in the book, but I can tell you about a particular time when I remember hearing thundering footsteps across the backyard of our home as Klansmen were running across the backyard to try to scare us, and they did. And so as a young child, I remember rolling off my bed and crawling underneath the bed and hiding just out of fear. There were other times when I know my brother and I would just look outside the window at night, and we would see a car that was typically parked in front of our house at nights, and we did not know who the car belonged to, but it was a car that had been placed there in order to protect our family from any ill wishes on the part of the KKK. My dad actually was one of a couple of people who safely escorted first grader African-American Deborah Lewis safely to her desk at Carthage Elementary School the day that the schools were integrated. And it was my father who was actually quoted in, I believe, the New York Times and the Washington Post, talking about the steps that the community had taken to try to prevent rioting as a result of the fact that integration had become real for our community.
Well, I'm sure that the experience of those years was upsetting to you, but clearly the lessons learned were valuable. How do you think you're different for having been through that as opposed to if you had not?
Randy, I tell you, the lessons that my brother and I both were able to learn from my father's example are absolutely priceless, and I will forever be grateful, because my father taught us that as a leader, you must have the courage to do what is right, to be truthful, even and especially when it is not popular. And he took a stand at this point in our history where, yes, there were nightmares involved in it, but there were also wonderful stories as well. I remember, Randy, when the schools were fully integrated, and it was actually the sport of basketball that brought our community together. And believe it or not, it was not necessarily coming out to watch the boys play, but the girls. And it was such an interesting evolution as we went from the early days of mass integration and, quite frankly, feeling uncomfortable to growing closer together and understanding, as an example, on the basketball team, that we were all there to follow one game plan, that being the coach's game plan. We were there to have each other's backs. We were there understanding that we would be stronger together than any of us ever could be if we acted as individuals. And just I still get chills when I think about it, but when the crowd would come out, the Caucasian and African American alike, and with resounding cheers, with voices in unison, cheering for our team as we would win. And it really was quite symbolic, I think, of the unity that we students wanted to feel. And one other quick story that I would like to share. The first time that after the schools were integrated in mass, and our basketball teams had gone away to play at another high school. And after the games were over and we all got back onto the school bus, and it felt a little tense, I will give you that. But in the midst of that silence, as the bus left Edinburgh, Mississippi, going back to Carthage, one of the African-American male athletes started singing the song Under the Boardwalk. And one by one, every athlete on the bus joined in unison, in fact, with harmony, singing that beautiful song. And we believed that it represented the harmony that we all were striving to find, and we ultimately did find. It's not to say, Randy, it was perfect, but for us, it was one of those lifetime moments that I will forever cherish because we understood to a greater extent what full respect means for all people, for all people.
That's a great story, Janet, and I really appreciate you sharing that with us. But I want to move along now and get into your later life. After graduating high school, you went on to the University of Mississippi, Ole Miss, played basketball there, and I think probably the women's basketball didn't get quite the publicity back then as it does now, but.
No, it did not. Actually, we had to pay for our own uniforms. They cost $13.
So you were an honors graduate at Ole Miss. Went on to graduate school with a degree in banking and finance. And after you left college, got married, moved up into the northeastern part of the state to Tupelo. And there, I guess you expected to be a banker for the rest of your life. Is that right?
That's exactly right. Undergraduate degree in banking and finance, an MBA in finance. And I was so fortunate to have been offered a job to go to work for what was then Bank of Mississippi, what is now Bancorp South. It's a very sophisticated financial services conglomerate that transcends 8 states in the southeastern part of our nation. And from the very beginning, I was so fortunate to have been assigned to work for a gentleman who to this very day is one of my favorite professional mentors. His name is Aubrey Patterson, and while he led retail banking when I first came to Bank of Mississippi, he ultimately became the CEO and chairman of the board of Bancorp South. And the thing that was amazing about Mr. Patterson is that he trusted his staff to learn from their experiences and to grow from those experiences. And I like to share, because I believe this is an important leadership responsibility for all of us, that Mr. Patterson taught me how to become comfortable being uncomfortable. And by that, I mean, he would give me an assignment of a project and have me do something I'd obviously never done before because I was green right out of graduate school. But he gave me guidance, and then he gave me free rein to go figure it out on my own and to come back and touch base if I needed to, but all the while stretching, learning, and growing. And so the fact that Mr. Patterson placed such trust in me, and my responsibilities were growing as my skill set was expanding. And yes, Randy, as you mentioned, I really thought I was going to be a lifetime banker. And it was one of those times in life where it seems like everything is going according to plan. We were well-grounded in our community. My husband and I both were enjoying our work. We had a wonderful nucleus of friends and family close by, and life was good.
So it sounds like you really felt like you were in the right place at the right time. You had a wonderful mentor at work. And along came one of those surprises that really has a profound influence on everything, a really significant personal event. And if you don't mind telling us about that, I think it's a really important part of your story.
I'll be happy to share that, Randy. You know, you just never know when life is going to take a detour. And that happened with me. My husband and I, like many of our young couple friends, wanted to start our family. And we were so excited when we found out we were expecting our first baby. And we had made every possible preparation to get ready for the arrival of this precious little one. The nursery was decorated to perfection. My friends had given me a shower. Everything was ready. And then our baby, Randy, was born. And our baby died on the same day because of a fatal birth defect. And I will tell you, nothing has ever so shaken me to my very core than to find out my baby was dead. And I cannot tell you the extreme sense of loss of control that I felt in that moment, and all the unanswerable questions that I wanted to have answered. Like, why did this happen when there was no history of such conditions in either of our families? Why had this happened when I'd done everything right from a prenatal perspective? But it happened. And in my case, I went home from the hospital after a few days, and I was empty-handed and brokenhearted. And this is where the real interesting part of the detour comes into play. Because when I was in the hospital for those few days, certainly I was fortunate to have been surrounded with the love of friends and family. But I also found myself surrounded by people who were at the time complete strangers to me. The hospital employees who, other than the doctor, did not know me from the next patient. And the way that they cared both for and about me while I was in the hospital really made a deep imprint on my life. And I am quick to share that you should never underestimate the power and the impact of the seemingly small acts of kindness. Because whether it was a gentle squeezing of my hand and looking into my eyes and saying the words, "I'm so sorry," or a hug from a nurse, or even the genteel manner in which a housekeeper entered my room, knowing she could sense the sorrow and the despair that I was feeling. There was just something special about how those hospital employees carried me through that valley. And in the weeks that followed the baby's death, even though just a couple of weeks earlier I thought I was going to be a career banker, I was sure of it. But then after I experienced the death of my baby and how these hospital employees loved me, if you will, throughout that experience, then I became deeply convicted that I needed to be in healthcare. And 4 months after the death of my baby, I was offered a job at the age of 27 to join the C-suite of the largest medical center in the nation outside a metropolitan area. And I knew nothing about healthcare.
Well, it sounds like the timing had in many ways to feel like it was providential. You had just had an awful experience that was difficult for you to get through. It sounds like the people in the hospital were instrumental in helping you get through that unthinkable difficulty. And then all of a sudden, someone comes and talks to you about working in that very environment.
It was amazing, Randy, how the stars aligned in this particular situation to take me from banking into healthcare. In fact, 2 years before the death of my baby, Mr. Patterson had nominated me to be a part of a statewide leadership development program called Leadership Mississippi. And during the course of the year that we worked together in that curriculum, we were divided into teams by congressional district. And on my particular team, there happened to be an executive from North Mississippi Medical Center. And during the course of our work on our project, this executive tried to recruit me to join his team. He said, Janet, I think you'd be a great fit in healthcare. And at the time, I was so loving what I was doing at Bank of Mississippi that I graciously and respectfully declined his offer, thanking him and just moving on with life, right? And then fast forward a couple of weeks after the baby's death, when by this point I'm really starting to feel this yearning to be a part of healthcare. And I had been sharing this desire with one of my dear friends who happened to be a neighbor of that executive. And my friend called me one day and said, Janet, you won't believe this. I know you want to be in healthcare. George has decided to accept a promotion at a hospital in upstate New York. You should apply for his job. And so I called George. I congratulated him on his great news. I reminded him he thought I would be a good fit in healthcare. And then I asked him if I should apply for his job, and he said yes. And so I, along with about 3 dozen other people, applied for this one position. And for some reason, the CEO chose me at the age of 27 to join the C-suite of the largest medical center in the nation outside a metropolitan area. And I knew nothing about healthcare.
That's very impressive. And I was just going to mention this was not like some tiny community hospital someplace. It was a very large, very complex healthcare delivery system within Mississippi, and somehow somebody thought you were right for it, and somehow you decided to take the risk. And I also seem to recall reading in the book that your mentor at the bank suggested that maybe it was not such a good idea.
Mr. Patterson wanted me to stay at the bank. In fact, several times after I left the bank, he tried to get me to come back to the bank. Randy, the thing that's amazing is that same chairman of the board who told me I was making a huge mistake quite a few years later, he happened to be the chairman of the board of North Mississippi Health Services, the parent company of North Mississippi Medical Center. And that's amazing. And I don't believe in coincidence, but there was a particular meeting where he and I were the first to arrive. And out of the blue, he said to me, Janet, I told you when you left our bank that you were making a mistake. I just wanted to circle back with you and tell you, you made the right decision. You're serving exactly where you're supposed to be.
Well, that sort of closed the loop, didn't it?
It absolutely did.
That's really powerful for someone who may have been giving you advice. Let's face it, from a selfish point of view, he wanted you to stay at his bank, and now he's congratulating on being exactly where you ought to be, right?
Exactly, and I think that it really speaks volumes about this executive, because he had a beautiful blend of confidence and humility. He admitted he was wrong, but he was also confident enough to lead this banking conglomerate and to be involved as a leader in so many important nonprofit organizations, such as our healthcare system.
Well, it sounds like you were very fortunate to have had him in your life at that time. But I want to move on a little bit and find out what it was like for you in those early years at North Mississippi Medical Center, walking into an environment of this sort where you have no experience at all, had to have been intimidating for you. So what was it like? Was it really radically different from banking? How did you deal with it?
Well, I will tell you, in the beginning, it was a little scary because I felt like I was walking into a foreign territory. The language is so different. In fact, I do mention in the book that I remember when I was taking a tour of this massive facility, the 650-bed medical center, and I saw a sign pointing to electroencephalography. And I thought, what is that? And one of the most important lessons I learned early on was not to be too proud to ask for help. And I think sometimes as leaders, we don't ask for help, or we don't ask questions because we don't want to give the appearance that we are uninformed. But it served me well, particularly coming into this new industry, to ask those with whom I would be serving to help me and to help bring me into the language and bring me into the way this organization operates and help me to learn from you. And that really was, frankly, a very wise thing to do. I didn't realize I was being wise at the time, but just to ask other people for their help not only makes them feel good, but it helps you become stronger and wiser as a leader.
And it was clearly the counterintuitive thing to do. I think we would all have a tendency to try to fake it till we make it, if you will. But you went the other way. In fact, I'm going to quote from your book, if I may. You say, I asked them to share with me candidly what they needed from me as a peer and what they expected as future deliverables from my department.
That's exactly right. I wanted to know up front, how can I support you? How I'm a member of this team. We are all in this together. Remember going back to basketball and the strength of the team in its totality as opposed to singling out individual athletes. We were all a part of a game plan that our CEO had brought forth for us as we were aspiring to achieve the mission and vision of the organization. And I really did want to know what was it that they needed from the department I was inheriting. Because you never know when you're going into a new role in a new organization if people have been pleased with what they've been getting from that division or department. And so there's no better way than to ask. And Actually, there is a chapter in the book entitled Gracious Leaders Seek Feedback, and it's just critically important to ask others for their guidance, for their advice, for answers to questions that you don't know. I have never yet encountered a single individual who was not willing to be helpful if you just ask them for their insights.
Well, I think that was certainly insightful on your part. As I said, I think there is a tendency for all of us to try to act like we know what we're doing until we do. But simply to ask for help like that had to have been very encouraging for those people who were there, because they knew you had no history in healthcare, and they had to be a little bit worried that somebody was going to come in here and try to change things without having the vaguest idea of what's going on. But I'm inclined to think that your approach really won their hearts and got them on your side immediately.
Well, it certainly was helpful to me, and I trusted them as well. The thing that was amazing, Randy, is that after I had worked for the medical center for about a year, I actually started seeing some commonalities between healthcare and banking. And as strange as that may sound, if you stop to think about it, both industries are delivering an intangible product. Both industries are highly regulated. Both industries are so incredibly dependent upon the customer relationship skills of either the tellers in the bank or the nurses at the bedside. And so even though the languages of the two industries were different, I jokingly say banks have DDAs, IRAs, and so forth, that hospitals have HMOs, PPOs, and ACOs. So the language is different, but at the end of the day, there was so much more in common than I had could possibly have fathomed before going into that space.
Well, it sounds like you really hit it out of the park in your early years, and I want to move on to some of the areas where you served in a moment, but this particular area of the book where we're sort of discovering right now, you mentioned the head-heart connection. I thought that was very good reading, and I would like to hear you talk about the head-heart connection, if you will.
Well, thank you, Randy. I'm happy to do so. I go back for a moment to those employees at North Mississippi Medical Center whom I described as complete strangers, but who loved me through my point of deepest despair. And I really think it's important for healthcare executives, for physician executives to understand the reality that there is a huge difference between what employees are motivated to do by the ink on paper of a job description and what they are inspired to do from within their hearts. I do not know of a single healthcare executive anywhere who is not constantly having to learn how to do more with less. And if you as a leader can help your employees discover the head-heart connection, then you have the potential to unleash their passion and have them turn cartwheels and be even more loyal to your organization. But it's the responsibility, Randy, of the leader to connect the dots for an employee so that they can see that direct line of sight between what they are doing every single day and the overall big picture objective of the organization. And I'll give you a quick example. I actually received a letter from a woman who had been a patient, and she talked about how impressed she was with the culture of our hospital. She went further to say that two of the housekeepers were in her room coming in to clean, and her husband, the patient's husband, was having a conversation with these housekeepers, and he said, "Hey, that's an unusual looking mop. Tell me about it." And instead of saying, "Yes, this is a mop and I'm here to clean your room," this housekeeper said, "I want you to know that my job is to create a safe environment where your wife can heal."
Wow.
I know. And so that is a beautiful example of the head-heart connection, because that employee did not relegate herself to say, "Hey, I'm here pushing a mop." I'm here to create a safe environment to help our patients heal. How beautiful is that?
That's fabulous. And surely somebody made her feel important enough that she understood that she really was important.
And we made that an important part of our culture and an expectation that we had of our 70 to 80 leaders, that it was their responsibility to connect the dots for their employees and to show them the big picture impact that they're having. All too often in healthcare, I've heard, it can be easy for a caregiver at the bedside to make that kind of difference, as those nurses did for me at North Mississippi Medical Center. But it is equally as important for the plant maintenance tech or a pharmacist who may not have direct interaction with the patients. They also need to be brought into the fold and to have the light bulb moment when they can see the big picture impact of the work that they're doing.
That's really profound, and it is the thing that I think a lot of hospital organizations just never get around to making sense of that.
Well, I think that they think they're too busy, and then I think they also think that it's fluffy, soft stuff, and it's not. I mean, it's absolutely strategic. You prompted me to tell you about, in the chapter under accountability, gracious leaders require accountability. One of the 4 questions that I required our leaders to answer every month, every 4th Friday of the month, this report was due. Actually, I'll tell you the 4 questions quickly. The first question was, what one accomplishment did your team achieve this past month that you want to celebrate? And that's so important because from the perspective of a gracious leader, it's not only assuring the achievement of the right results, but celebrating the right results. Second question was, tell me one challenge you expect your team will encounter next month and that you need someone else's help in order to overcome that challenge. And this was strategically important because we taught our leaders to anticipate difficult situations, and furthermore to understand that no man is on an island unto himself. So we're all to collaborate with one another as a team in order to overcome challenges. The third question required our leaders to report their results across the balanced scorecard. So what were your results in quality and safety, patient satisfaction, employee engagement, labor management, overall budget performance? That part of the report, it really, you might expect to see in a lot of hospitals. But the fourth and final question was really a bit of a surprise. It was a requirement that every leader share a story with me every month about at least one employee, physician, or volunteer who had gone above and beyond the call of duty. We required our leaders to tell us about the great work their team was doing. So that, and I made a commitment to them. I said, you find people doing great work and I will make the time on nights or weekends to send a handwritten note to the home. And Randy, I'll never forget the day early on in this journey when we were making recognition strategic, where I got a card from a physician who wrote me a thank you note, thanking me for thanking him. Now, think about that.
I'm really not surprised to hear that because physicians are not accustomed to getting that kind of positive feedback from the administrative staff because it's relatively rare. So I think you figured out a way to really generate some belief in your mission and the way you were leading the hospital.
Well, it was rare. In fact, I'll tell you, Randy, my conviction is that employees and physicians and volunteers were craving, absolutely starving to death to know they were making a difference. And in addition to writing thank you notes, which may sound old-fashioned, but in this age of electronic medium, where we're living on emails and text messages, it makes a big difference when somebody takes just a minute to send a note that's mailed to the home. But we also brought in the people we were honoring into our monthly leadership team meetings. And without exception, I can remember that when we were recognizing physicians, other members of their group would come to the leadership meeting to be present when their colleague was being honored. It was very special. And it just helped to, it was part of the transformation of the culture of our campus into placing more and more of our time and energy on the people who are getting it right, helping those who don't get it right to either improve or they don't get to stay. And I guess this is a good opportunity for me to also tell you my deep conviction about gracious leadership is that it is not soft whatsoever. It's about the reality that you can be tough and kind concurrently, that you can require accountability and be compassionate. And I guess one last thing I will tell you relative to this topic of accountability for recognition. When we first started requiring our leaders to find these stories of their employees or physicians who had gone the extra mile, I had one of my nurse managers who came into my office, and she was just as sincere as the day is long. And she said to me, you know, Janet, I've got this broad span of control. I've got this big staff. I'm stretched so thinly. I do not know how I can possibly find the time to identify people who are doing great work. And I looked at her as she was saying those words. I said, I want you to think about what you just said. You don't have time to identify people doing great work. But yet we make the time to deal with the poor performers. What's wrong with that picture?
That is my idea of putting the cart before the horse.
Right.
And a really valuable observation.
And we as leaders, physician leaders, administrative leaders, we get sucked into this, the busyness of our business, that we feel like, oh, we got to deal with the poor performers. Well, yes, we do. But we shouldn't allow ourselves to get sucked into this vacuum where we're all of a sudden spending a disproportionate amount of our time on what not to do as opposed to teaching people how to do things with excellence.
So very, very true. So let's move along a little bit here. And this will really be a fast forward from your start at North Mississippi Health System. You went and spent some time at Vanderbilt University Medical Center and then at Shands, the University of Florida. And finally, found yourself leading a hospital in Columbus, Ohio. That's about as far from the SEC as you can get.
Absolutely. I did have to learn how to say OHIO. But I can still do a really good hotty-totty, let me tell you, when I go back to Oxford.
I bet you did. So Mount Carmel Health System, which, according to the book, was in a little bit of a struggle when you got there, but that's where you found yourself as the president of the hospital. Is that correct?
That is correct. And let me give you just a little bit of background because I think it's really important for those who will be listening to our conversation. There is a chapter in the book about how gracious leaders are courageous. And one of the most important aspects of being courageous is to learn how to advocate for ourselves. And when I was in Tupelo, after my first CEO left and went to Houston, Texas, to ultimately he became the president emeritus of Memorial Hermann Healthcare System in Houston, and a new CEO came in. And all of a sudden, after about a year, I discovered that I was the only one of his direct reports who had not been promoted to a vice president. And I knew the CEO was just thrilled with the work product that my division was producing. So I was a little perplexed as to why I also had not been promoted. And so rather than letting this brew and fester, if you will, I decided I was just going to have a conversation with him. We had a great relationship. And so one day at the conclusion of a meeting where everything had gone to perfection, it was a very positive discussion, I asked him if he would give consideration to changing my title so that it would accurately reflect the magnitude of the work I was leading. And I won't go into detail, Randy, but in the moment after we chatted for just a few minutes about my request, his face turned red and he got angry and he said, "Why is it important to you that you have a title change?" And in the moment, I respectfully said, "I'd like to answer your question with a question. When our board recruited you here, why was it important to you that your title be changed from administrator to president?" And he left my office, didn't say anything other than, "Well, you raise a good point." And a couple of weeks later, he announced my promotion. Now, I tell you that story because fast forward to 2004, I, for most of my healthcare career, have led strategy, marketing, business development, M&A, those staff types of functions. But one of my impactful professional mentors had encouraged me along the way, Janet, you really ought to be running a hospital. And there were two reasons for that. One, he knew that I loved working with doctors. And you and I both know, Randy, that's not always the case with hospital administrators, but
That's about as rare as anything that I can imagine.
And that's what my mentor told me. He said, Janet, you get it. This is rare, but you get it. You should be running a hospital. The other reason was that I had a keen sense of appreciation for the value brought forth by employees in all roles. So when I was being recruited to Columbus in 2004 by Mount Carmel, they had offered me the job to be Senior VP of Corporate Development. And I thought to myself, I have absolutely nothing to lose. So I told the CEO I would happily accept his offer and come develop, expand, refine the corporate development division if he would promise me that one of these days I could lead one of the hospitals. And he said yes. And so I'd been there about 18 months when the interim CEO called me into his office and asked me if I would like to lead St. Anne's Hospital. And Randy, I'm here to tell you, if I had not garnered the courage to ask for that opportunity, I never would have received the joy, the exhilaration, the gratification of leading St. Anne's Hospital, which is now among the top 5% of hospitals in the nation.
I can believe that. And I don't want to get too political at this point, but I think it is a fact that I think women have been too often overlooked when they were clearly the right person for the job. And hats off to you for standing up and saying, hey, here I am, take a look. It's the right thing to do.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, Randy. And when I'm making presentations about gracious leadership to different audiences, those that have a majority participation of women, I'm also telling them it's not only that they're overlooked, but that when we'll turn cartwheels to advocate for other people, but when it comes to raising our hand and asking for opportunity, all too often women will shrink into the wallpaper and not voice their desire to be considered. I've also been told that, and this was actually shared by the CEO of Cardinal Health, who happens to be a huge advocate for women in leadership, Mike Kaufman. And he said his conviction is that if a job requires 10 skills and a woman has 9 of the 10, she will not raise her hand and say, I can do this job because she's lacking one of them. And he said, if a man has 1 of the 10, he'll raise his hand. So I guess for those who are listening, just find the courage to ask for opportunity. And in so doing, look for ways to match the passion of your purpose in life with the purpose of the work. Because when you do match passion and purpose, it's like you're not even working.
Really good advice. And it sounds like that their investment in you paid off. And I'd like to hear at least a capsulized story of the turnaround at Mount Carmel at St. Anne's.
Well, Randy, when I first went there, in fact, in the book I talk about having the dream of running a hospital. And then after I got there for a few weeks, I wondered if that dream had morphed into a nightmare because I was going to a hospital that had experienced a broken heart. My predecessor had been fired, and he was beloved by many of the people on that campus. The hospital was not performing well from a financial perspective, and the quality was not good. In fact, I sometimes say I was afraid to go to the mailbox because of all the complaint letters that would be there every day. And then after I had been at St. Anne's for a little less than a year, as I recall, the government had just started publishing patient satisfaction statistics, and my hospital had the worst patient satisfaction of any hospital in all of Central Ohio. That was not a happy day, but it was a pivotal day in the history of our organization. because I brought together our 80 leaders. I put that article up on the slide on a very big screen, and we together vowed that that would never, ever happen again. And my goodness, Randy, we could spend hours talking about all that was involved in the cultural and financial and operational turnaround of that campus. But I really always strive to give the credit to the leaders of that campus who were willing to embrace a new vision. They were willing to set the bar high and to strive for excellence and to never be satisfied, frankly, because we always have opportunities for further improvement. And over the course of the 9 years that I was there, those leaders made it possible for us to have one just fabulous financial performance. In fact, we were doing multiples of what other hospitals with AA bond ratings were achieving. We were receiving Leapfrog Grade A and other national quality awards. Our patient satisfaction had jumped 20 points, and our employee engagement almost across the whole spectrum had progressed to approaching top decile. And I mentioned one thing I really want to stress, because I know we'll have a lot of doctors listening to this podcast. We had such a collaborative relationship with our medical staff. I have always viewed doctors first as my customer, but secondly as my partner. And I made it my practice at St. Anne's to ask 3 powerful questions. I've actually used those 3 questions throughout my career, but they were so important in my interactions with employees and also and especially with doctors. The questions were, please tell me one thing we can do to improve the patient's experience. Totally open-ended. How can we improve the patient's experience? The second question, tell me one thing we can do to make your work life better. And the third question is, what else is on your mind? And I'm telling you, Randy, when I first went to St. Anne's, it was like going to a fire hydrant for a sip of water. It was unbelievable. All of the feedback that just came rushing out because people had feedback to give, but they had not been asked for it. And so with doctors in particular, I would always ask them to tell me one thing that's broken. What can we do better here? You're closest to the patient. And I would tell our nurses and the frontline employees, you have the bird's eye view. What is broken? How can we fix it? And then in my conversations with doctors, I would always, and I did this with my direct reports as well, I would ask them to tell me one thing I should do differently in order to more effectively lead the campus. And that sent the message, I'm not perfect. I'm on a journey of continuous improvement. I am a lifelong learner. I need your feedback. I value your feedback. How can I do a better job of leading this campus in a more effective manner?
2 things impressed me about that story, Janet, which I think is really profound. And one is that nowhere along the way does it sound to me like your solution was to throw money at the problem. Many times people think that we can't do better because we don't have resources, because we don't have deep pockets. But yet you manage to pull it off without having to go out and float more bonds and make more loans and those sorts of things. And then the other thing is that at no point do I hear you saying anything about how you had to line the employees up and throw down the gauntlet and say, look, we got to have happier customers or you're going to lose your job. There was never any of that. And so many times I think that those 2 things are what gets in the way of the sort of success that you're talking about.
A couple of thoughts. First of all, on the don't throw money at it. You're right. Oftentimes people think that is the answer. And I will tell you, and this was really important, our hospital was making this huge journey from being a struggling community hospital into an award-winning regional medical center. So, and we were bursting at the seams when we did the turnaround and we were improving patient satisfaction and we were improving quality and we were improving relationships with our medical staff. We did make an investment to expand the hospital to add 60 beds and to start an open heart surgery program. So that did require money. However, we did not line up our employees and say, by golly, you've got to have happy patients, and unless you make them happy, you're out of here. My conviction is that if you've got happy doctors, if you've got happy happy employees, you're going to have happy patients. And so it was about, again, unleashing and empowering the employees, and yes, empowering the doctors to be our experts and bringing forth information about how we can improve together.
Well, you certainly have shown that you know how to be a gracious leader, and it shows in the results. And I really enjoyed learning about how you got there. I have another sort of nebulous question or two that I would like to put to you just to see what your thoughts might be. How do you know when you're in the presence of a gracious leader?
When you are in the presence of a gracious leader, you are working with someone who has extraordinarily high expectations, and they are respectful to everyone in how they lead. You are with a leader who is crystal clear with employees about expectations for success. And you are with a leader who's going to celebrate those successes. You are with a leader who is confident to make split-second decisions in the moment when needed, but who's also humble enough to say, I got it wrong, folks, I'm sorry, or I need your help, or I don't have all the answers. You are in the midst of a gracious leader when that person is not only seeking feedback from all the key stakeholders, but is also very purposeful in how they're providing feedback. Let me give you a specific example on that one. We had to train our leaders that if you got an employee who's doing some things really well and they're not doing other things well, that if you say, Randy, look, you do a great job at A, B, and C, but you need to do a better job of D, E, and F. Well, by the time you get to the but, they forgot A, B, and C. So you have to, it's almost like this mindset shift where you have to say, Randy, you really do a great job at A, B, and C, and Randy, you can be even more effective if you'll do D, E, and F. So being purposeful and respectful in how you're providing that feedback and harvesting the momentum that can come when employees and physicians see that they have the power to change the world. And I say that not flippantly. Those employees at North Mississippi changed my world when they loved me through my deepest valley. And I believe healthcare is a higher calling. I think we're so fortunate to work in this industry, and that we have really yet, though, not tapped even the tip of the iceberg relative to all the potential that resides within the hearts and souls of our employees and our physicians.
It's really encouraging to me to hear you say that we are fortunate to be involved in this in this industry, because it is quite a blessing, I think.
And not every day is fun. Let's just face it. The back to budget meetings are not fun. There are other meetings that are not fun. If you have to have a layoff, it's not fun. But if you look at our work life from a big picture perspective and see the joy we should derive through what we are doing and making a difference in the lives of other human beings, then we really need to count our blessings.
Well, I can tell from reading the book that you have a profound understanding of what success looks like and how we get there, and that you've given really, truly serious consideration. I mean, this is not just something that you threw together. You give a detailed description of 13 key ingredients of gracious leadership in your book. And I'm wondering, since we have the recipe there, do you think that gracious leaders are born or are they made?
Wow, Randy, that is a really good question. And I think the answer is probably that it's a little bit of both. I think there are some people who by human nature may find it more natural for them to express gratitude or to show compassion, which are two of the 13 key ingredients of gracious leadership. But I am 100% convinced that anybody and everybody can learn and can master all 13 key ingredients of gracious leadership. When I'm making presentations, I invite the audience to peruse the slide that has the 13 key ingredients. And I always ask them if they see anything on the list that looks necessarily new or complex. And the answer is no to both questions. And then I ask them, well, if this is not new, if this is not complex, then why is it that 30% of all leaders are toxic? And that is a startling and shocking statistic, but sadly it is true. So I believe that because the key ingredients of gracious leadership are simple, and in the book, by design, I not only, with each of the 13 key ingredients, I shared something I had done to make that key ingredient come to life, but I give tips, very pragmatic guidance that the reader can use in order to make gracious leadership and its 13 key ingredients real for that respective leadership's journey. So I believe that while some of us may be a little more inclined to feel some of these attributes of leadership as feeling more like second nature to us, everybody can learn it. And practice makes perfect. It's, again, go back to basketball one more time. We had to work on our major plays and practice them and practice them and practice them and practice them until we got it perfect. And then you go out and you play and you make mistakes and you learn from the mistakes and you just keep going. But at the end of the day, gracious leadership is about the intersection of ultimate respect and optimal outcomes. It's about getting to peak performance and being respectful in how we lead.
Well, I think everybody who reads the book, and I hope everybody that hears this podcast will, I think they'll be gratified to learn that there are really no mysteries. All of these things should make sense to all of us, but it is easy, I think, in the difficult world of healthcare delivery to overlook those things and to sort of lose your focus, and those moments can make it difficult to be a gracious leader. So it's good that you have put this book out here for us. I think a lot of people are going to benefit from that. And having read the book, I would have to say that if you follow that little recipe, you're almost certainly going to have success. And along the lines of recipes, I would like to let our listeners know that at the end of the book, there is a fabulous recipe for caramel cake that I just can't wait to try out myself. You want to tell us a little of the history of that cake?
Happy to do so. And I'm laughing to myself only because tomorrow I'm actually making this cake for some family members who are coming in on Thursday. There's a chapter in the book called Caramel Cake and Culture. And in that book, it was a lot of fun for me to be able to reminisce and share some of my favorite childhood memories. And some of those memories actually took place on the Ole Miss campus when my family would tailgate in the Grove in the fall during football season. And I cannot ever remember a time that we went to the Grove and tailgated that we did not take with us a Hattie Bell caramel cake. This cake was made by Hattie Bell Johnson, who was one of the loved and revered bakers from our community, our small town of 3,000 people. And throughout my life, I have finally mastered the task of making this cake. It's hard, and it took a lot of failures, frankly. And in the book, I draw a parallel between the difficulties of making this cake and getting the icing consistently to the right consistency, and how hard it is to get healthy corporate culture just right. And so making this cake, which, by the way, is not going to be on your cardiologist list of favorites because it's got lots of butter in it. Sorry about that. Maybe it's okay to cheat just once in a blue moon. But making this cake, you have to put in all the key ingredients, the sugar, the flour, the butter, the almond flavoring, other things involved. Just like to be a fully respectful peak performance gracious leader, you cannot omit any of the 13 key ingredients. With both the caramel cake and with culture, there's the art part. In other words, how much persistence or perseverance, how long do you beat that cake icing until it's the right consistency? And it's really an art. How hard do you work? How long do you work? Do you ever stop working on positive corporate culture? No, but you've got to shape and mold it in a way that is right for your respective organization. And at the end of that chapter, I say that when both with the caramel cake and with positive organizational culture, when you get it right, you know it, and it is so good.
So very good. And it's a fabulous analogy, Janet. I can't think of a better one, in fact, because baking is something that can so easily go wrong if you get distracted by the smallest thing. And it's a great lesson in how important it is to always keep your eye on the ball. And
exactly.
And I really enjoyed reading that chapter, and I can't wait to try out the recipe. I'll let you know how it goes. Well, we are at the point in the program, Janet, where we typically ask our physician guests to give us a capsulized version of how they feel that success arrives. And we ask them to put that into the form of their own personal prescription for success. And we would like it very much if you would do the same for us. So I will sit quietly while Janet Meeks gives us her personal prescription for success.
Well, thank you, Randy. As I was thinking about this podcast, and in particular the 3 prescriptions for success, I must tell you it was a little bit difficult not to overprescribe because there are several things that I would share. But in narrowing that to 3, here's what I would like to share. And these are tips that I wish I had known as a younger person starting out in healthcare. First of all, take more risk relative to your career advancement. I've already shared that I was able to get a title change early in my career, and that really set the foundation for me to have the courage later on in my career to make a bigger ask when the stakes were higher. And the thing I really want to share with those who are listening is that timing is critical, and the likelihood that you will get a yes if you're asking for a promotion, for a stretch assignment, for a new opportunity, your likelihood of getting a yes is better if you're already a trusted, proven performer. But I also want you to understand that just because you're a trusted, proven performer does not necessarily mean you're going to be given that opportunity for advancement. Sometimes you just have to ask. And again, as a reminder, I never, ever would have been given the opportunity to lead a hospital had I not had the courage to ask that CEO when I was being recruited to a completely different job. So take more risk relative to your career advancement and ask for opportunity. My second prescription for success would be to encourage you to make seeking feedback a ritual. I've talked about the importance of 3 powerful questions. I've talked about the importance of asking employees and physicians to tell me how we can improve the patient's experience or how we can improve their work lives. When you are asking someone for feedback, it makes them feel valued, respected, and appreciated. And I can tell you that there's not a leader anywhere who's ever going to be able to help his or her organization reach peak performance and maximize its complete potential unless every person in every role feels respected, valued, and appreciated. So for me, seeking feedback from the doctor all the way to the housekeeper was important because they are the individuals with the best view of the front line, and they are the ones who can tell you what's broken and needs to be fixed. Lastly, relative to seeking feedback and making it a ritual, I encourage you to start now learning to say thank you when people bring you complaints. Thank you. When a doctor tells you something is broken, you should tell them thank you, because as leaders, we can only fix what's broken if we know about it. And so learn not to say OMG, but say thank you. Because when you express gratitude to others for telling you what's wrong, what's broken, then you are opening up the floodgates to find out what's really going on in your organization, not to mention the fact that you are building stronger relationships with your key stakeholders. And then, Randy, my final prescription for success is something that was really, really hard for me. And that is sometimes you just have to slow down before you can speed up. Now, I'm a recovering type triple A. I mean, it's like, let's get this work done. We need to get it done quickly. We're losing opportunities. Let's go, chop, chop. Well, that backfired on me fairly early in my career at one point, where I was recruited into an organization and the senior executives were really pounding me saying, hey, this department's not really delivering the way it should be. You need to go in and change X, Y, and Z. So I, being a good soldier, came into the organization and started changing X, Y, and Z, and found out, much to my disappointment, that nobody was following me. And so I realized, after I had some good soul-searching conversation with a close colleague, that I needed to slow down and build relationships of trust with that team. And once they trusted me and they knew I would look out for their best interests and obviously the best interests of the organization, then we could speed up and get greater work accomplished even more quickly. That was hard for me, but it was one of the most important lessons I learned early on. We travel at the speed of sound. We want everything done immediately, but sometimes you get greater results more quickly if you just simply will have enough discipline to slow down before you speed up.
Well, Janet Meeks, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom and your experiences with us. You have been a really enjoyable guest. The name of the book is Gracious Leadership, Lead Like You've Never Led Before by Janet Meeks. And Janet, I would like to give you an opportunity to tell our listeners how they can find you, how they can find the book, any other contact information that you would like to give us, please.
Thank you so much, Randy. I invite you to visit my website, www.graciousleadershipbook.com. And there you will find links to Amazon to order the book. If you want a signed copy, I'm happy to take care of that for you. You would just need to order that from me on the website. I encourage you to be sure to read the blog post. And then if you will scroll down to the bottom of any of the pages on the website, there's a place for you to sign up for the free Gracious Leader email. And if you sign up for that email, then you'll automatically receive the ongoing Gracious Leadership blog posts that I send. I'm so happy to share that in addition to the books currently being available in hardback and in Kindle versions, that before the end of August of this year, we are expecting the Audible version of this book to go live. So the audio book will be available on Audible, Amazon, and on iTunes. And if anyone is interested in learning more about gracious leadership or even in a speaking engagement related to this topic, then again, go to the website and there is a speakers page where you can send me information about your request, and I promise to get back to you as quickly as possible.
Well, Janet, once again, thank you very much for joining us today. It has been a delightful and an enlightening conversation, and we really appreciate you being here. And we will look forward to spreading the good news and recommendations about your book, because it was a good read. Thank you again.
Well, thank you so much, Randy. I guess before we close, I just want to thank everyone who is listening to the podcast, and especially our physician listeners. because with more and more physicians entering the realm of healthcare administration, you are holding the future in your hands. And I would encourage you to know that how you will be training those who follow you, just know that they're looking to you as a role model. And I hope that you will set the bar high for yourself and to be a fully respectful leader, a gracious leader as you guide your teams to peak performance.
And that brings to a close this episode of Prescription for Success. You can subscribe to our podcast and glean more insight about my guests by reviewing the show notes on our website, rxforsuccesspodcast.com. That's rxforsuccesspodcast.com. And while you're there, please leave a comment or a question, and I'll be reading those on the air from time to time. Finally, if you'd like to help support the show and gain access to members-only content, you can become a patron at patreon.com/RX for Success podcast. That's patreon.com/RX for Success podcast. Thank you so very much for listening, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.